Bazzett, my former English teacher, for being here with me and being in conversation with me. I'm going to read for like 5 to 10 minutes, is what I was told, and I will do that. And then afterwards, we're going to have a conversation. I'm really looking forward to that. So, and thank you all for coming. This is really special. So my book is written in fragments. They're like really short. Some are like a sentence long. Others are, I think the longest one's like 2 or 3 pages. So I'm going to read just a smattering of fragments from across the book, from the beginning and the end. Let's do it. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Caring for this baby has taught me new ways to resent. Other people tell me things, absurd things about seeing with baby's eyes, etc., and I resent that I do, in fact, sometimes see with baby's eyes. Like in the morning when a blue-gray bird whose name I don't know preens on my white picket fence, when there are titters I've never noticed before from the swallows in the oak, when once Galen and I spy a mourning dove in the cemetery near our house. I mean, honestly. I often say that summer is the most desirable season, but I confess I wish it were winter. I wish the moon weren't an abstract expressionist, hurling silver onto my neighbor's oak, watching its handiwork drip down onto my short-cut grass. I wish the baby were older. I wish I were older, were not resentful, and sent, feeling again, all the time. But I am resentful, and she is still a baby, and the moon, yes, hello moon, is just as annoyingly beautiful as ever. I want to buy a book about birding so that I can identify that regal blue-gray one. I think I would notice him more, or at least notice more about him if he had a name. Of course, he already has a name, I just don't know it. This is exactly my problem when we find out about the baby, when the caseworker calls us to tell us that she is 5 days old. We don't have a car seat, I say. Target's open. I can hear the smile in her voice. That afternoon, as we leave Target with a cart full of baby things, we get sent a picture. A tuft of thin black hair, dark skin, a green semi-transparent pacifier like a small moon almost eclipsing her and probably round face. We call the hospital from the Target parking lot to ask if she's getting attention. The nurse laughs. The doctors fight over who gets to feed her, she says. She's a perfect baby. Writing in the present tense is a way to avoid resentment, a paradox through which I crawl inside my resentment. It's true, it's funny. So far down, I cease to feel again, rather inhabit the moment I felt the first time, the spring that feeds resentment, which isn't resentment at all, but just what it was like to be. Of course, the lie of the present tense is that the me that felt first and the me that felt again are the same. In life, they are not the same, but on the page, without the past, these selves collapse into a point from which narrative distance cannot escape. But even though critics don't like the present tense, just like they don't like the verb to be, I chose it for a reason. For example, parenting is like the present tense, in that it transforms resentment into something with words and a spine. Mornings with her, awake before the sky is light, are a species of blessing, an Old Testament blessing of the kind you might not want, a blessing that cracks ground, water pushing up and out. Things I resent include my depression, always so boring, my stolid, plodding lack of hypomania, once so exciting, the fact that I miss my hypomania, am I a monster? Thoughts of my own monstrousness, can I be redeemed? The concept of the present tense. Resentment's floodwaters have swept away so much of what I've tried to build, but maybe then, suddenly, everything changes. I don't resent the baby, not really. Sometimes in the morning, I take her outside and lay her on a padded blanket on the ground. She makes little vocalizations as though she wants to talk to me, and tenderness runs across my face like a bramble of plump blackberries. In college, I used to wake up early enough to be the first person in line when the little cart that sold ham and cheese pastries opened, early enough that I could sit with a crossword on the bench outside and smoke. Things have changed since then. I tried to make the pastries, which never turn out. I print off a Wednesday puzzle, which is now sadly beyond me. But I still fondly remember the round, full sensation of the cigarette smoke in my throat. So maybe things haven't changed that much. Or maybe one day you smoke a pack a day, then suddenly you don't. But that story is as much a lie as any other arc that bends toward anything. Like you can elide the middle, like there is a beginning, a middle, and an end. As much true and not true. Because then and suddenly are lying words. Nothing changes. Things become more like what they already were. But what exactly were they already? I won't always be resentful because some part of my soul, what a Christian word, already is not, in fact, resentful. This I have to believe. One day, mouthing curses, Saul went journeying, and suddenly there shined round him a light from heaven, and he fell to the earth. And when Saul arose from the earth, when his eyes were opened, he saw no man. They led him by the hand and brought him into Damascus. He was there 3 days without sight, and neither did he eat nor drink. The truth of the conversion is that the other Saul was already there, painted over, ready for God's light to strip him clean, blind him, ready to need neither food nor water. So, one of my least favorite questions is, what happens in your book? Say it like this happens, then this happens, a friend encourages. I know, I say, I'll try, but I don't want to try. I suppose what happens is that I resent a lot. I suppose what happens is that then, and suddenly, I don't. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. Okay. But depression is a moon in a perfect orbit, always moving, never closer to or further from its object, which is my own broken self. Today, I wake to the baby's cry, and I resent the hoarseness in her voice. I resent that I didn't wake at the first sound, that I slept till she wailed. I resent the reminder that I am not the man I want to be. After I feed her, we go to the porch, and I lay her down on a stack of towels and drink my coffee while she coos at the sun that passes through the leaves of the neighbor's oak. The questions I have can't be answered by rustling trees or chattering squirrels. I ask them anyway. That's prayer for you, I guess. These days, I crave a garden, but why? I want something to tend, but it's improbable that I would, in fact, tend a garden, since I only barely tend myself. But still, I can see myself picking a slug off a leaf, weeding around the herbs, watering the whole face of my little ground. The truth is that I want a garden in the same way I want God, because of the beauty contained in its improbability. I look out at my neighbor's garden, verdant, and a future sadness fills me. When my depression comes back, I will fail my garden, cease to tend the things that give me joy. But then the baby cries and needs a bottle, and besides, I know, except the things I cannot change, etc. It used to be that in a tragedy you died, and in a comedy you get hitched, so I feel the urge to exit the story with a wedding. But this fact remains, I still sometimes want to die. Prayer is an awful narrative device because it ends either in deus ex machina or futility, but still, I pray that my lost friends will get sober, that I will stay sober, that this baby will live her life unconcerned with sobriety. While I pray, I know 1,000 other men, just like me, are on their knees praying, mostly for stupid things or selfish things, things that probably won't come to pass, but the thought heartens me anyway. I pick the baby up, feed her a bottle, and burp her. Billions of people have burped their babies. Billions of people have prayed. Joy in life, if there is any joy in life, comes when one does away with the idea that originality is a virtue, or even possible. Someday, maybe, I'll surrender to that and take my place as an orderer of psalms and not a psalmist. The baby closes her eyes, and I kneel to pray once more. God doesn't respond, but the words of my prayer interlock with the words of all the others, and maybe everyone prays for stupid, impossible things. I don't know. You use a lot of quotations, a friend says. Why are you hiding behind their words? That question makes sense only if the point of art is out there in plain sight. This is to say, prayer is useless, but only if the point of prayer is up in heaven. But I don't really know the point of prayer, and the baby is crying, and I don't know what to do with myself, with my resentful, irredeemable self, so I read Psalm 5. You cover the righteous with favor as with a shield, but there is no shield against the tears, and why should there be? There's nothing to cover, just me and a baby and God together in this apartment, while the sun stretches its legs before climbing up the sky. Someone tells me that writing is always either in service of getting laid or getting even. Maybe, I think, but only if it's possible to get even with yourself. Sitting on my porch after the whole neighborhood has gone to bed, unable to find my headphones, I let my phone's speaker bleat out a Bach cantata. Seufzer, Tränen, Jammer, not, a soprano sings. She and the oboe take turns leaping off a minor cliff, down and down. They each faint in resolutions, only to continue the unwinding melody. I make the mistake of looking up the full translation. Sighs, tears, grief, distress, longing, fear, and death prey upon my oppressed heart. Oh, Bach. It's late, and Bach is maudlin. I am maudlin, and I'm not sure who I am without my sadness, without my disease, without my resentment. Sometimes I pray that I'll want to pray. Sometimes I believe that I believe in God. Sometimes I imagine a healthier imagination. John Calvin, God is invisible, not only to the eyes, but also to the understandings of men. He is revealed to us in Christ alone, that we may behold him as in a mirror. If God is invisible, what use is he? If Christ is our mirror, what use are we? What use is faith? Might be a summer question, but what am I to do in this flowering season of my discontent? The baby goes to daycare, I go to work. The baby learns dada, I swoon. The baby cries, I take ketamine. Time grinds on, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly, change always materializing despite itself, despite me, because of me, both. Thank you.
this working too? Oh, wow. Hey, all right. Should we sing Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas?
Which version?
The one where it follows up with It Might Be Your Last.
It's a true story. You can learn about this in the book.
Yeah, Judy Garland said it was too dark, and she was right. That was beautiful. Thank you. It's so lovely to hear it in your voice too. I was rereading big swaths of it after we did NPR, earlier this week, and suddenly I could hear your voice in my head. I don't know if that's good, bad, too much information, but the fact that your voice was in my head. I wanted to start with a question. You mentioned you start with the vignettes and the snippets, and I know a lot of people say that's like the most seductive way to write a memoir, but it almost never works. It ends up being a bunch of beads instead of a necklace. And then you take on very directly in what we heard, the whole idea. I think you do a lovely job of cueing the reader early on that we're living inside the present tense. And so I'm curious about the choices you made to order it, and why the musical form, why the lessons and carols, why make it so hard on yourself in some respects, in terms of just having to live resolutely in the present moment and to live inside of these vignettes.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you asked me about form, because it's clearly an obsession, right? And I don't trust chronology as a way of understanding what happened to you. I think it's really, it really fails, And I think the thing about a memoir that's traditionally written, and there's nothing wrong with it, but the thing about it is that it captures this one way of understanding one's own past, and it gives you authority, grants authority, right? You have this I that is in the real present, and then you have all the I's leading up to that real present moment, and all those older I's are kind of subsumed into this this is what I now understand my whole story to be. And I really wanted to resist that. I really wanted to resist there's this trope of the recovery narrative, which is things were bad. And there's nothing wrong with the trope. I mean, I think it's fine. But I wanted to capture that, especially when it comes to my own mental health, especially when it comes to the way I've understood that. It comes and goes in cycles. It's cyclical. It changes. When new things happen, they change how I understood what happened before. And I wanted to capture that. And I thought that these formal choices would kind of power that understanding. It certainly did not make it easy either to do it or to sell the book. But who cares about that though? I do keep a grudge apparently. But that was why I chose to do this form this way. And the lessons and carols, I think also you can't sustain. I think the lesson that I learned from other writers, Maggie Nelson wrote a wonderful book called Bluets. Heather Crystal wrote a wonderful book called The Crying Book. Jenny Booley wrote a wonderful book called The Body and Essay. All these books have a conceit. And that conceit, in Maggie Nelson, it's that she's writing like Wittgenstein, Ludwig Wittgenstein, this German philosopher. And so she's writing in his style and appropriating his kind of form of argumentation to talk about the color blue, which is very kind of interesting. So she does this whole thing. And that's how she's able to sustain these fragments, is by borrowing this form. And I thought, well, I can borrow a form too, and that will make it at least that there's some kind of logical ordering structure that the reader can grasp onto, and it's not just a bunch of beads as opposed to a necklace,
Yeah.
I think that's the trick.
Well, and you use the ship of Theseus metaphor. I started thinking about it a little bit because I think the passage you're quoting from when you were ship of Theseus comes up very early in here, right? And then, but toward the end, you started saying it was pretty near to where you were reading. When does a song change so much that it becomes a different song altogether? Actually, it's the Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas. I didn't realize that. This is not an idle question. I'm really asking, have I changed so much that I've become a different person altogether? Is the me that once was dead? Am I born anew? Where did you come down on the metaphor in that, in terms of, do you think the old ship of Theseus, of all the broken parts that gets reassembled, is more ship of Theseus than the one that is replaced?
Yeah. So the ship of Theseus, for those who don't know, I had studied in philosophy class in college, and the idea is the ancient Athenians wanted to commemorate the ship. They replaced every piece of it over the course of many years until every piece had been replaced, but it's the same ship, right? Like, or is it the same ship? That's the question. And I think that paradox, I'm going to cheat, and I'm going to take the Wittgensteinian way out and say that it's a bad question, not a bad question, but like it's the wrong question to ask.
You could say that.
Well, the thing that's interesting is like that was the question that consumed me for so much of my life was if I don't have the problems that I have, if I keep drinking, if I am able to change and take my medication on time and do all the things I'm supposed to do, isn't that removing some essential John from the equation? And what am I left with once I take those parts out? And I think that like in some ways that's the wrong question to ask. And instead, what I hope is that like we can live all of us inside this like conundrum, this paradox of like, you know, like we are at once not the same person and exactly the same person. And that is the kind of living in that paradox is what we have to do. And I think Wittgenstein would say, you know, that like the quote I think is like, you know, I'm gonna butcher it because I don't have it in front of me, but you know, the idea is that like he wants to excise from philosophical language these questions that have troubled him. Do I have hands? Yes or no? This is like an actual thing that a lot of like professional philosophers, like people with PhDs, worry about if they have hands. And like they really have hands. They're a demon on their shoulder telling them that they don't have hands or whatever. And I always love this because Wittgenstein says, well, here's one hand and here's another. How do I know the world is real? Here's one hand and here's another. He's saying that is a dumb fucking question. and I think that like the thing about these paradoxes, they're so seductive to have an answer to. And I think the secret is figuring out a way to live with that cognitive dissonance of like, there is not an answer.
Well, there's a lot of, I mean, I think in what you just read now, that line really struck me. Speaking of that paradox of kind of living that contradiction, it said, I'm not sure who I am without my disease. And I heard, I think because there's a lot of verbal play in the book, but that word dis-ease, you know, is really, it's just the word ease with a prefix in front of it. And it made me wonder, what if it said, I'm not sure who I am without my unease, which sounds a lot more attractive. It's like a divine sort of discontent, and because the book is quicksilver and it moves, and we see that. And unease isn't necessarily completely bad. Dis-ease, I think, is. You know, and it was interesting how you kind of helped tune my ear. I think over the course of reading it, to little verbal plays like that. There's a lot of loss in here. There's a lot of grief, but there's also a lot of humor, you know, and delight, and sometimes it's in language. And I think also just the willingness to choose form, you know, the fact that at the end of the day, there might not be much order in the world beyond what we give it, but then we choose what order we're going to give it. So at one point when you've got folks gathered, so I think every section ends with the lessons, you know, everyone gathered around a Christmas tree or a version of that, you know, but we're moving through time. So a party, essentially, a celebration. And bringing disparate folks together, you know. It's just, you just wrote Mrs. Dalloway 9 times. That's all you had to do. And, but I think the first or second time you refer to it as a collection of faithful atheists. And really, toward the end of the book, start grappling very directly with the fact that belief is a choice, and thinking about that, which is something I'm very interested in lots of ways, but especially, I think, spiritually and politically over about the last 6 or 8 years. Yeah. So, could you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah. I mean, I think that like that question. So in college, my last year of college, I did a recreation of the non-lessons and carols, which is the Anglican or Episcopalian, I think we're supposed to say now, tradition where you read selections from the Bible. And in the traditional service, there's like let me go back a second. I'll ramble a little bit longer. But the E.W. Benson, who would go on to be the Archbishop of Canterbury, was worried that all the people would go out drinking in his flock because there was his church was under construction. His cathedral at Truro was under construction. So he said, well, we'll do something really fun. We'll sing carols and we'll read from the Bible. And I guess that works. People loved it, so that's good. And it became an institution in World War I. They redid it, adapted it with new works, and like new works for organ and choir. In college, I did a recreation event. I did it at my childhood church, Plymouth, which I know a lot of you are familiar with. And we had done it there. I was the assistant organist choir master. I feel like we only did 5, which is perfect. It's just so perfect that Plymouth would only do 5 of them. It's like they didn't want to do the. I remember there's one. The second lesson is Isaac and Abraham and Isaac. It's a really bleak story, and I do not remember us doing that at Plymouth. It's a dark one, so I'm glad we skipped that one. But anyway, so I did it in college, and everyone had a part, everyone had a little play, we all did it, and then we just kept doing it. And the kind of fun thing about it is that it's taken on a real life of its own. And I think that early on it was much more arch. Although there's this moment, right, where everyone turns off the lights, we're all holding a candle above our heads, and you say, and the light shone in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. And then you blow up a candle, which doesn't make a ton of sense, because why'd you blow up a candle if the darkness did not overcome it? But whatever, you're holding the light up, it's really great, wonderful. And in that moment, everyone gets the chills. And it's this moment that it's hard to replicate. And that moment is the moment, right, of Lessons and Carols. And all the arch, fun, all that falls away. Mm-hmm. And what you're left with is we are choosing to engage in this ritual, and as a result of doing this ritual, we are getting something different out of it, than something bigger than the sum of its parts has come out of this thing. And so we keep doing it every year. And now I perfect bind the books and risograph print them, and it's getting a little expensive, but here we are. And we had I think 33 people the one before the pandemic, tons of people, and I think that decision to do this ritual mirrors in some meaningful way the decision that I made to believe in God. And that is not to say that I don't. I think I'm fundamentally uninterested in the specifics, right? I think that there's this belief that in order to be a believer, you have to have answers to these questions of the problem of evil or whatever, pick your thing. I just don't care. I choose not to care that there's inconsistencies, and instead I focus on the choice of the belief, and in that choice I find agency and power, and that power has gotten me through so much, and it's gotten so many people through so much. I think about how many people have been touched by a program of recovery that entails spiritual belief, and I think about just the vast network that I'm plugged into. I think about how amazing that is. I think about Bach has his own problems, right? He's not a great guy all the time, but he does write amazing music. I think about the number of works of art that have been produced based on this belief, and there has to be something there. There has to be something out there. I don't know what it is. I'm not interested in the specifics, but there just has to be something out there.
I think the flip side of that, of choosing to believe, it sounds like almost when the performative becomes real. Yeah. And I'm thinking of the Picasso quote. I had all the quotes hanging up in my walls in my classroom. We talked about the Saul Bellow one that came up, but do you remember the one from Picasso that said, "Art is a lie that makes us see truth"? Which almost seems like yin yang to what you're saying, where if it makes us, I find that it's the imperative of the verb, where you kind of don't have a choice. If the art's good enough, you'll start to see through the lens of that reality. Just another quote that you can hide behind.
I can hide behind, yeah. Well, that's really interesting. I do think that in some ways I chose to believe, and I want to own that choice. In other ways I feel I didn't choose, right? It's just a thing that happens. But I think that something really important to me about knowing the lineage that I'm plugged into. And that lineage is flawed and problematic and dangerous and disgusting and wrong, and it has been used to condone evil acts. And yet also that same lineage and being aware that that's what I'm plugged into is the thing that enables me to affect change, right? If it weren't for the fact that I know, if it weren't for me acknowledging that I'm plugged into this Christian tradition, and this Christian tradition has all of these litany of problems, I don't know, I would just be acting in very similar ways, but completely ignorant of what that lineage has done. And I think that it's really important for us, people in general, to know what we're plugged into and know where we come from. And if we don't know where we come from, how the hell are we going to do different, right? That's the thing. And so I think owning the choice and owning our choices, even when we think that choice is kind of not really a choice, to really have a choice to believe in God, I don't know. But I think I have to own that, because like if I don't own that, then I can't own the good and the bad, and I have to own both. I can't like otherwise I'm cheating. You know, I'm cheating in life.
Yeah, to kind of revisit that and go back to that whole heritage. There's a ton of words in the book. Thinking about revisiting, recollecting, remembering, recovering, resenting, reminding, repairing. Do you have a favorite?
My favorite is resentment.
Too easy, but we'll give it to. Can we go back a little bit, because I just was realizing this is going to be I'm just finishing off my 23rd year of Blake. So you were like just, I mean, I know it seems like 18 years ago, a long time. I was only 5 into it, right? You know, and somehow we landed perfectly symmetrically here, right? It was 18 years ago, and you were 18 when we were reading contemporary poets and playwrights in room 342 up there, which is kind of crazy to think about. How much of being Hamlet on the stage and playing recorder and reading the books that you read in high school do you feel are still like inside your cellular makeup and or made it into this book?
Well,
You have to be honest though, don't
I'll be
you?
honest. I'll be
Okay.
honest. Every 7 years, every syllable was one sentence.
Right, so there we go.
And yet, I think that they're all there. They're all there. It's funny. So, Rebirth is another one that comes up a few times, right?
Yeah.
And Mr. Ott, I don't know if you remember Mr. Ott.
Yeah.
Mr. Ott was obsessed with Rebirth. The guy knew where every Jesus figure was in every book we read.
It's a cross right here.
And I think that like the funny thing is he's not wrong, right? Like that's the best part. The whole like gimmick only works because he's not actually wrong. He's just really annoying. Sorry, Mr. Rod, if you're watching. He's really annoying. But you're not wrong, so congratulations. You know, the thing that's kind of amazing about art, and whether it's Hamlet, whether it's I played Hamlet in Hamlet. It was the high point of my theatrical career. Miss Landis is here, the director. There was an amazing. I remember. Actually, this is good. So I remember I was gonna like riff on something random, but now it actually makes sense. I don't remember who you had these players playing music during Hamlet. I was joking with Mike before the thing that everything sounds better with a backing track, right? Like you put music to something and it just sounds like richer and fuller and better. And there was this music that and I remember like before you give them any direction, they just kind of plays like a jazzy song while I was like riffing on doing some soliloquy, and like everyone was like riffing on these soliloquies. It was a really fun. We were all up there. We did like I feel like a couple scenes where we were just like up there talking with this music, this jazz music behind us, and that was it was really powerful, and it stuck with me. Like the fact that I can remember that moment of us all creatively making art together while these people were improvising jazz behind us. And it was so powerful and so moving, and I feel like it pulled out all of the stuff that was important in those scenes, and now they're stuck with me. They're there. That's the thing about art, right? Is that like we are reborn in it, even when we don't want to be, and even when we think the metaphor is bad, we get reborn into it. And I think that like that is something that the mystery of Christ being reborn, right, is reflected in us, and that's like I think the thing that I would say Calvin got right is that like we are reflections of Christ, right? Like and like whether or not you believe Christ is divine or not doesn't matter, right? What matters is that the story is that God gave us this person so we can see ourselves in him. We can't see ourselves in this Old Testament God, but we can see ourselves in this New Testament God who's cool, Jesus, and has two thumbs. We can see ourselves in him, and that's rad, right? And so like I think that like his death and rebirth, like we get to see ourselves in that too. And I think the way that we see ourselves in that is through art. It's through the process of discovering that the things that we thought we understood, we did not understand, and then understanding them in a new way, re-understanding, reminding.
Yeah.
As you put.
Yeah. Well, I think we're running out of time quickly, but I want to ask about the parenting and the baby too. And I was really curious. You named Lavinia in the acknowledgments, but never in the actual text. And also just thinking about like, I think it's one of the very early vignettes when you get the call from the cave caseworker, and then we go all the way through the end to getting married and sort of, starting to form a home. But it's a big choice, and thinking about the context of everything else that you're saying here, and especially in terms of seeing through the eyes of the child. I know you sense the cliche and you keep wanting to shuck it off in the book, but it's still there, and just wondering to the extent, if that hadn't happened, do you think you write the book? And to what extent, has that shaped your vision of rebirth, recovery, recollecting?
I wrote a book, and I was done with it in, I want to say, October of 2019. And we got the call April 21st, 2020, which was not a fun time. I don't know if you guys remember that. We were all bleaching our vegetables. Not a good time to get that call. Got the call. And I immediately knew the book was wrong. Not just bad. It wasn't bad. It was fine. It was good. But it was wrong. It was not the story I wanted to tell. And I'm relieved, actually, that it didn't find a home before then. I got a crushing wave of agents rejecting the book, and publishers rejecting the book. And then we made a choice to be foster parents. And we did not know what the outcome of that choice would be. And that is, I think, the kind of crazy thing about parenting. And this is something you said, that teaching is you plant a seed and then you have no idea, any idea, if it's a bad seed, it's a good seed, no, it's what else. Parenting is full of these choices. I've discovered that you make the choice and you have zero idea what that choice is going to end up doing.
And then the choice makes you for the rest of your life.
And you're haunted by the choice. I would not change that we chose Vinny, but I don't think I knew the full ramifications of those choices that I made. And that's not to say that I would not make them the same. I think I would make virtually every choice the same. But I did not understand what I was doing. And that so in January of 2020, I went on medical leave for a crippling bout of depression. That I was on medical leave for 2.5 months. And then I found ketamine, a doctor who was doing an experimental treatment with ketamine in Boston. I did it, and it was remarkable how fast I felt better and different. And then we got the call about Vinny. And then the pandemic hit, and we got the call about Vinny. It's crazy here. And I am so grateful that I made the choices I made to go on leave. I made the choices I made to get ketamine and not do ECT. I made the choices I made that led us to get Vinny. But all of that stuff, I had no idea what I was doing. And I think that I still have to own the choice. To get back to this thing, right? If the choices hadn't worked out, I think I still have to own them, right? And I made a number of decisions. I made a decision to smoke when I was 17. And that was a stupid decision that I will regret for a very long time. But I made it. And I have to own that I made it, right? And yes, there's all sorts of stuff around agency and I don't want to victim blame, right? There are all sorts of situations and power structures and things that influence the choices that we make. But I have found it really powerful for me, even when I am truly a victim, to find a way to acknowledge some amount of choice. That doesn't have to be the whole thing. It doesn't mean that I am taking responsibility for stuff that I can't take responsibility for, but there are all sorts of things that I can take responsibility for. And even when I made the choice without perfect information or any information at all, in the case of having a toddler now, I still get to own that choice, and that is a relief and empowering.
Do you play the recorder for her?
I do play the recorder.
Very happy.
There's a scene in the book, very brief, where I play the recorder for her and she throws up. It's a tough critic, tough crowd. She actually calls it Daddy's Hoo-Hoo, which I find very funny. But yeah, the whole thing is great.
Daddy's hoo-hoo.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're supposed to take questions
Yeah,
now.
let's take some questions.
So this is where you regale us. Well, by the way, I am a teacher, so we can have a long, painful silence. Just let it ride.
I will ask one.
Hey, Rusty.
Hi there. So, I mean, you came into our lives with our Plymouth Church group, and so we followed you through a lot of the things that you went through as a young man, as a teenager, and a whatever. And we all looked to your parents on how strong they were and what they did to allow you to be you. And is that part of also what's in this book?
Absolutely. I think, like, I noticed a long time ago that I didn't write about my parents in this book. And the reason I didn't write about my parents in this book is because I didn't know, and this is the secret of a memoir, is that you leave everything out. like the stuff you leave out is the stuff that you can't understand. And I think, like, even though I have a daughter now, I still don't really get how my parents were able to do what they did. And I'm deeply grateful for it, right? Like, this is like, I'm even grateful that I think that they either didn't see or didn't understand how sad I was until I told them. I'm grateful that they let me discover that for myself. Because they let me discover everything for myself. And they taught me that I could ask for help. And I did. And, like, that is the thing that, like, I am so shocked by to this day, is that I don't know how they did that for me. Because I don't know how I would do it for my daughter. I hope I can do it for my daughter. I hope I can have the strength to say that I am always here for help and always have that door open and somehow understand. Like, I don't know how, I just knew that I could talk to them and it would be okay. And I also knew that they would respect my decision to do what I was doing. And that, yin and yang, I don't know how they did it. Anyway, I don't know how you guys did it. Thank you, I love you.
All of that.
Eugene O'Neill sent a letter to his wife Carlotta and said, I give you this original script of Old Sorrow written in tears and blood about Long Day's journey. Was your book written in tears and blood?
Oh, aren't they all?
43% tears.
I think that if you don't enjoy writing, you're not going to do it. This is a secret that I learned, again, from my parents, which is that you make music, practicing music fun, otherwise you don't do it. My parents let me get out of doing the dishes for a year about playing music. And that was like the lesser of two evils. And then at some point I discovered I actually liked it. I was like, oh no, I can't do the dishes. You know, it was like really unfortunate. I have to go practice. So, like, if you don't enjoy a thing, you're not going to do it. That said, speaking of paradoxes, it also fucking blows. Really sucks to write a book about some of the sad things that you went through, some of the saddest things you went through in your life. There was a moment where I was writing about friends who died in their addictions, and I thought, I'm never going to finish this book. I don't want to go back here. I don't want to go back here. And then I got really enamored of the language. I think you're right, that, like, that joy, I'm glad that you saw that. I didn't see that. I don't think I saw it until you said that. But, like, the flips, so there's this wonderful poem by Robert Hass, which, by the way, I learned in Mr. Bazzett's class. And I'm going to butcher it, but I'm going to try it. It goes, it's called Meditation at Lagunitas, and it says, all of the new thinking is about loss. In this, it resembles all the old thinking. The dead sculpted, I don't remember it, fuck it. But there's a great line where he says, because there is in this world no one thing to which the bramble of blackberry corresponds, and he italicizes the word blackberry. Because there is in this world no one thing to which the bramble of blackberry corresponds, a word is elegy to what it signifies. And then he says, we talked about it late last night, and in the voice of my friend there was a thin wire of grief, a tone almost querulous. I discovered after talking this way that everything dissolves, just as pine, hair, woman, you and I. There was a woman I made love to, and I remembered how, holding her small shoulders in my hands sometimes, I felt a violent wonder at her presence, like a thirst for salt. For my childhood river with its island willows, silly music from the paddle boat, little muddy places where we caught the orange silver fish.
Yep.
Yeah. A word is elegy to what it signifies. And that is one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is such tenderness, he ends his poem, those afternoons and evenings, saying blackberry, blackberry, blackberry. because there's joy in the language, and also like I went through this phase when a friend of mine died, and I was like, man, like I don't even remember stuff about this person. How can I like hold this person in my heart if I don't even remember basic stuff about them? I thought this was like the most important thing, and then I realized that like Galen said to me, she said this. Galen's my partner. This wild thing. She said, in Spanish there's this word to clean, and then you learn like to scrub and to polish, and then you're like, wow, I still don't know the word that I want. She's like, that's what all of language is.
Yeah.
And there's also so much joy in that, though, right?
It's all translation. It almost sounds like it was a blessing that the words were kind of a leaky bucket.
Yeah.
You know, if they captured it completely, it'd be overwhelming. They can't quite hold it.
Yeah.
It's the Leonard Cohen thing. It's the cracks. That's how the light gets out.
That's it.
Yeah.
It's out. Yeah.
Was there a particular moment when you made the decision to climb out of your pain?
Yeah, I mean, there were a few, right? I think that like there were decisions. I made a lot of decisions I made a lot of really true decisions to stop drinking. I made a lot of really true decisions to change my life that did not stick. And I think I want to hold space for the idea that those were real choices that I was making in those moments, but I was incapable of no human power. It was not me. I didn't have enough juice to make it stick. And I think that like I don't know about the mystery of things. I don't know how it works. I do know that like there have been moments where I feel like I am making a choice to humble myself, to let go, to surrender, and it works. And there have been times where I feel like I do that, or maybe I don't do it perfectly and it doesn't work. And I don't know, like I think that like I'm really torn on this question because I think that the answer is yes. But the answer is also a complicated yes, because I feel like I've done it so many times and it didn't do anything, you know? And I think that there's a lot of luck and chance in this world, and that sometimes it's easy for me to mistake my own success in climbing out of that hole once with like the idea that I'm always going to be able to climb out of the hole in the future, which is not true. It's easy to mistake my success in climbing out of the hole once with the idea that like, why can't other people do that, right? Like, if I did it, surely other people can. And yet, I know for a fact that like, I have access to resources that other people don't have. And I know for a fact that I have, and not just like money, I do have access to more money than other people do, I think, but I also have access to people like my parents who are wonderfully supportive and generous and help me out, right? And I have access to friends who are gone through so many things. I have access to all this stuff. And so like, I think what's really interesting about like that framing, which I think is not a bad framing at all. What's interesting about that framing is that like I've had to learn how to accept the truth for myself that I'm taking ownership over my choices, while at the same time, and this is speaking of paradoxes, right? Like I made the choice to drink, I made the choice to smoke, I made all these choices. Also, at some point, I have to understand that not everyone has access to the tools, the resources, the whatever, pick your thing, that like enabled me to, for the moment, for today, get out of that hole. Does that make sense? Yeah. Yeah.
I've related to that and what you're saying. When you're in those choices in those moments, and you're absolutely right about resources, but I won't go off on a tangent. How do you, because I think inherent in that question and what you're talking about is, yes, it might not be true that each time you're actually able to get out of that hole, but you have to keep making choices, and you have to be able to like see that that's a possibility to make that choice.
Right.
I mean, how did you do that for yourself? Or how, like, there was a couple of times when you were talking about your friends and in recovery, where either during the time where somebody was passing away, or just struggling, where you seemed to struggle with where you were versus where they were, and how do you, like, in those moments, how do you find those choices? Do you mind asking? Kind of.
Yeah, I do. I don't know. It's a good question, though. I think if I knew the answer to that question, though, maybe I wouldn't have struggled to write this book. You know what I mean? Like I guess, like, well, yeah, I could. We could talk more about this.
Yeah, I was gonna say, come to court tomorrow.
Oh, great. My sister's a judge, if you want to remember.
I was not trying to do that.
Vote Sarah West. Come out for her. She's a former public defender. Just saying, we need more of those on the bench. Yeah.
Not an untrue
You
statement.
just were sort of, framing it as climbing out of a hole, or maybe the question did for you, but, I don't know, I mean, I guess that kind of gets back to something you were saying earlier that I'm still curious about, which is just sort of like how you conceive of certain aspects of potentially yourself as being like pathology versus personality, and like wanting to climb out of a hole. In my mind, that is, part and parcel with seeing yourself as being in a hole, right? And like seeing a problem, seeing that you need to be something other than where you are and who you are. So I guess how, and I need to read the book still, but how has that sort of like conception changed, and is that also part of what
I really struggle with diagnosis as like a model, like the medical model. I think it's so useful in so many ways for so many things, and also so troubling in so many ways. I have the diagnosis of bipolar disorder. I think that like we don't know, when you break your arm, it's pretty obvious you broke your arm. There's a bone sticking out of your arm, right? Like you all see it. And you know that like you can fix this thing. We have a constellation of symptoms that we call bipolar disorder, and that's swell. And I get that, I guess I get that like insurance companies need some way to bill. I guess that's why we have diagnosis, right? Seems great. So we have like these codes, these diagnostic codes, and we fit these things into boxes, and like it's so wrong because we don't know. We just don't know why bipolar disorder is. We don't know why it is. And some of it surely is social, and some of it surely is not, and some of it surely is genetic, and some of it surely is not. And I have no earthly idea why we choose to imagine that because we can put a label on it, it means that we understand what it means for a person, or how we're going to engage with that person. I think diagnosis is all these problems. I struggle with it, and yet I think it's really important that we have tools identities to claim. And so I'm really grateful that I got to claim the identity of bipolar. It was such a relief. Finally, I got sober, and I was having a hypomanic episode. I wasn't sleeping, and and then all of a sudden, like this energy that it's a crazy energy that I had, and I was like on top of the world. I was like, be sober forever. I'm gonna be like the king of sobriety. Look at me go. And then like I started coming down from it, like curdled. And I didn't understand anything that was happening to me, and that happened in high school a few times. I didn't understand why that had happened. And then this doctor was like, you have bipolar disorder. I was like, oh great, I totally get this now, right? Really powerful. Also, like, what does that even fucking mean though?
Yeah.
So I'm really torn about it, and I think you'll. If you read the book, you'll find. I think what time is it? Am I way over time? Right there. Should we do one more?
Take one more?
Yeah, all right.
You okay with that, Chris?
I'm quick.
Hi.
I really dispute what you say about diagnosis.
Oh no.
No, and I mean, I've had a lot of experience with psychiatrists and psychologists, and I think there's a lot of research, there's a lot of constellation of symptoms that not everybody is going to have them, and for diagnosis, you have to have more than one of those.
Sure.
And I think that people determine, therapists and psychiatrists determine how someone should be treated
Yeah.
with drugs, or with talk therapy, or with a combination of the two. So to have an ambivalence about diagnosis, I don't find that persuasive.
That's fair. I mean, I will say, I think that I'm not an expert on psychiatry. I'm not an expert on it. I will say that living through the system of having seen, Jesus Christ, how many psychiatrists I've seen, and living through the experience of how many SSRIs, SNRIs, how many drugs I've been on, and asking people the question, why does an SSRI work? And finding out that we don't totally know, right? Like, do we know? I don't know. Like, do we figure that out yet? Did we figure out why ketamine works yet? I don't think so. And so, like, to me, like, there's something fundamentally different about breaking an arm and bipolar disorder. Now, I might be very wrong about the utility of diagnosis at a structural level, but I think for me personally, I have found, and maybe this is, maybe I'm engaging in the no true psychiatrist fallacy or something like that, but like, it seems to me that so many psychiatrists have not been very forthcoming on what the truth behind, what the broken arm is behind behind my brain behaving the way it behaves. That I confess I'm somewhat skeptical. But that said, I think it's important to note that I would be dead if it weren't for psychiatry, and I would be dead probably if it weren't for psychiatric medication. And these are all true things. So like, who am I to say, right? Like, I guess I'm willing to express ambivalence about diagnosis as a structure, but I do think, and I'd love to chat more about this at some point with you if you want. But I do think that there is something tricky about a proposition that would have me believe that modern medicine understands what's going on in my brain and the brains of other people who are diagnosed with bipolar disorder, when it seems to me fairly obvious that we don't know what the fuck is going on up there. But more to go. Yeah.
John, doesn't it help somewhat to have the doctors to try to diagnose? They make mistakes.
Sure.
But they're gonna try.
It's absolutely
They
true.
reach an arm to you.
They do. And I would again point to my own luck and good fortune that I have the monetary resources and the stable job with health insurance that lets me pay for doctors who are more helpful than others. That is fantastic, and I'm psyched about that. No pun intended. But
Totally psyched.
Totally psyched. But I do think, nonetheless, that like the world would be a very different place if we were more comfortable. At least if I think I would be happier if I could strip away some of the, if I could let myself live in the mystery of what the fuck is going on in my head.
You wanna get rid of some labels.
I want to get rid of some labels.
Yeah,
I want to get rid of
got
some
it.
labels.
Leaky buckets.
Leaky buckets. Thank you guys so much.
Thanks.